Good afternoon. We welcome Mr. Dan Brown. He's a hurricane specialist and also the warning and coordination meteorologist for the National Hurricane Center. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for being with us at EcoExploratorio, Museo de Ciencias de Puerto Rico.
Thanks so much for having me, Ada. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So, what is a hurricane specialist? So, all you do is study hurricanes, or do you study other areas of the weather?
So for the folks at the Hurricane Center like me, there's 10 of us that actually do the hurricane forecasting, and thankfully we really get to focus on those hurricanes. It really makes my job actually a little bit easier than someone like at a National Weather Service office, and where they're dealing with winter weather and severe weather, tornadoes, and all types of different weather. We at the Hurricane Center really get to focus on hurricanes, and by that I mean tropical depressions, storms, hurricanes, and stuff that might form into a hurricane. But again, that's our focus there.
Did you ever think about becoming a hurricane specialist when you became a meteorologist, or how is that passion growing with time?
I did. My meteorology career kind of started when I was a child. I wanted to become a meteorologist. A lot of us in meteorology had something that spurred us on like that. My father was one that really liked to track weather a lot, so I kind of was watching weather with him. I'll have to admit that I moved to North Carolina where they get snow, and so I was following a lot of snowstorms when we might miss school. But I was born in Florida, and so my grandparents lived in Florida. I had a set of grandparents who lived both in Jacksonville on the East Coast and then a set in Sarasota on the West Coast. So I was always tracking hurricanes, making sure they were going to be safe. And that's kind of where I got the passion for tropical meteorology. And it really was a dream to go on to become a meteorologist at the Hurricane Center and ultimately a hurricane specialist.
What was the first hurricane that you ever worked or forecasted?
I looked this up the other day because someone asked me a similar question. So the very first hurricane that occurred while I was at the Hurricane Center was Hurricane Gert. I started at the Hurricane Center in 1993. It's not one a lot of folks remember. It actually moved into Mexico. But for about the first 12 or 13 years at the Hurricane Center, I was one of the meteorologists in the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch. It's a branch of the Hurricane Center that does a lot of marine forecasting. So I was doing a lot of that more behind the scenes work. But in 2006, I became a hurricane specialist. And since that time, of course, we've had a lot of busy hurricane seasons. So I've done, forecasts for a lot of, unfortunately, some storms that have done a lot of damage, like Hurricane Sandy in the U.S., Hurricane Michael, of course, Hurricane Maria and Irma that affected the Caribbean. So, last few years have been doing a lot of forecasts. I wish I could say it would be a little quieter this year, but we just don't know yet.
What amazes you the most about this tropical phenomena?
First of all, I think it's always interesting to look at a satellite picture. I just love looking at satellite pictures. You see something different every day. And to be honest, when a hurricane's far away from land over the open ocean, there's actually some, amazement or almost a beauty to the storm, having the eye and how symmetric they are and so forth. But it is, I think, when you sit at the forecast desk to think that if it's heading toward land, it's going to affect people's lives. There is a bit of sadness in that, because we don't want people to get hurt by them. I mean, that's one thing I do appreciate and like about the job is that we get to help people prepare. The folks like us at the Hurricane Center, we have to do that. The folks that are flying in the planes are risking their life to go and collect the data to help us make the forecasting. So ultimately, it's up to folks at home to do their part and to be ready for hurricane season.
Have you flown an aircraft, a hurricane aircraft?
Yeah, I've been on the aircraft a few times, but never into a storm. So I have to say I haven't had that opportunity. But I've been on board both the Air Force C-130 aircraft, the NOAA P-3, and even our G4 aircraft that flies around the storms. Those have all been as part of our hurricane awareness tours that we do. And unfortunately, we couldn't do that this year. I know we have one that always ends in Puerto Rico every year, the Caribbean Hurricane Awareness Tour, which is a great draw. Hopefully we'll be doing those again in the future. But again, those are when I've been on those planes, and it's so great meeting all the meteorologists and the pilots and the folks that do that for a living, because they really do have an important job, and they're also so passionate about what they do.
And it takes, people don't realize this, but it takes a huge infrastructure for the forecast, for the decision makers, and for the general public to take action in order to actually save lives and property, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a tremendous team effort. And I don't know that everybody really realizes how much of a team effort it is. It's not just the folks at the Hurricane Center. I mean, even us forecasters, we have a group at the Hurricane Center that are they're doing behind the scenes work, making sure the data is flowing, the computers are up and running. They're just as much a part of it as well. But as you mentioned, we also have the folks flying into the storm. Then we're coordinating with all the local National Weather Service offices and even the international meteorological services across the Caribbean. Again, we're talking when those storms are threatening to make sure we're getting the right watches and warnings up for the residents, and that those folks can take that action. But then finally, it's folks like yourself, the media, that can then help communicate the message. If we put out a forecast and no one heard it, it wouldn't do many people any good. So again, we rely on the media to help get that message out. And then finally, it goes to emergency managers, and we're able to provide some dedicated service to them to help, again, communicate what the risks are going to be, what the storm surge is going to be, what the winds are going to be like, and where there's going to be the heavy rainfall, so that then folks can prepare for each of those hazards. And it's an important job what those emergency managers do, because they're the ones telling folks when they need to evacuate and exactly when they need to be putting up hurricane shutters and getting those final preparation tasks completed.
But you don't work with the emergency managers just in that moment. It takes some time for them to educate, prepare, in order then to make the evacuations and make decisions, right?
Oh, absolutely. We work with them in the heat of the moment, but as you said, it really takes building the relationships with those folks in the months and even years before the event comes. We want to have the trust. They want to have the trust with us. We want to have trust with them, and as far as making those right decisions. So, at the Hurricane Center, this time of year, when we get to after the hurricane season in basically December through May, I always like to call it the outreach and education season, because it is a time of the year in which we're out teaching emergency managers how to use the Hurricane Center products, what the uncertainty is in the forecast, so they can make better and more informed decisions.
So as a warning and coordination meteorologist, you have the responsibility for conveying a very important message. It's one about safety and people understanding the cone of error and understanding their graphical products and also text products. Can you differentiate and illustrate our public about all these different means of communications that the Hurricane Center has?
Sure. The Hurricane Center, we issue a variety of products, and I know a lot of folks in hurricane areas know what time those come out. We issue those in Eastern time at 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. Each day. And with those, what we call forecast packages include both text products. One's called the Public Advisory, which is really just a free text product telling you where the storm is located in simple language, where it's going to go, whether it's going to strengthen or weaken. And then it's got a section for all those hazards. Where's the storm surge going to be the worst? Who's going to get the winds and when? And then also what the rainfall is going to be. But we issue a lot of graphical products. Of course, the internet really changed that about 2 decades ago, allowing us to issue a lot of these now graphical products. So there is the cone that you mentioned, and that's an interesting product because it's a really nice, simple look at where the center of the storm may go and where those watches and warnings are up, but it doesn't tell you a lot about where the impacts are going to be. And so we have to get folks to remember that. The cone doesn't tell you anything about the storm size. Again, where the storm surge is going to be the worst, where the rainfall is going to be a problem. It's only telling you where the center of the storm is going to go. So we have other products. There's some wind speed probability products that tell you what the risk of getting tropical storm and hurricane force winds are. And now we have even new storm surge products that tell you how high the water could reach, how far inland it might penetrate. And even more recently now we're issuing storm surge watches and warnings because we know storm surge really is that greatest risk for loss of life in the United States. We see a lot of folks such as in Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ike, that can, if they don't leave those storm surge areas, can end up drowning because that storm surge, it's basically when the winds of the hurricane push that water on shore.
How do you see the forecast improving? How has it improved, and how is it improving for the next years? Are there going to be any major changes?
So, the Hurricane Center forecast, it's a real testament to meteorology and the science that we've seen our track forecast greatly improve. We've seen those errors cut by more than in half in the past maybe 2 to 3 decades. So the track forecasts have gotten a lot better. Intensity forecasts in this past decade, we're starting to see a little bit of a hope that we've maybe kind of gone over the hump there as far as making some improvements to our intensity forecast. Well, we still struggle sometimes with the rapid strengthening storms, like Maria, that strengthened very quickly. It was entering the Eastern Caribbean, like Dorian last year, that strengthened quite rapidly east of the Bahamas. We still struggle sometimes with those. The Hurricane Center is also always trying to improve our suite of products. And in fact, right now we have a lot of social science activities going on, studies to see how people understand the products and how can we make them better so they can understand them better in the future. So it's really this twofold, trying to improve the meteorology and the forecast, and then also trying to improve the communication.
Do you see any changes in the role of the meteorologist in the society?
I think the role has shifted a little bit in the past decade or so. As our computer models are getting better and better, it's not to say we don't need a meteorologist there. In fact, one of my biggest jobs at the Hurricane Center as a forecaster is to ensure consistency between forecast to forecast. The models sometimes swing pretty wildly. You can say, one time it's going to hit maybe Hispaniola or Dominican Republic, and next run it's going to say Puerto Rico, the next run it goes back to the Dominican Republic. We can't have forecasts like that. We at the Hurricane Center try to provide the real consistent forecasts, slower changes between forecast to forecast, and it benefits us that way. So there is that role of the meteorologist, but I think the other role is to be the one that helps communicate the forecast. Help take what is a model and then tell people, what does that mean to me? How bad is the surge going to be? What's the impact going to be at my house? And I think that's where the meteorologist has changed and will continue to evolve, again, providing more what we call impact-based messaging or support.
Now, we have a challenge this year, especially with the COVID situation. So health becomes a major problem, especially in the dealing with the emergency. How do you think the Hurricane Center, if at all, will be part of that message? Is that going to be included in any way with the official messages from the agency?
Hurricane season's fast approaching. It's something we're all going to have to be thinking about. It may take us longer to get some of those supplies, so I would encourage folks to start doing that now. This is National Hurricane Preparedness Week, so it's a really good time to start making that list of what you need as we go into the hurricane season. We've already worked with some folks at the CDC to tweak a little bit of our messaging for this particular week, to reference the fact that we'll have to consider social distancing, things like that as we're doing our preparedness. But, a lot of those decisions are going to be made at the local and state levels with our local and state emergency managers. So it's really going to be up to them as far how things might change once we get into a hurricane threat. But I know those folks are already looking at that, now.
And then I was talking to Roberto Garcia from the National Weather Service office in San Juan, and it is really concerning the fact that also you as meteorologists at the Hurricane Center, at the National Weather Service local office, you have to keep social distance in order to keep the operation going. So how is this going to work for the peak of the hurricane season?
Yeah, we've already, the Hurricane Center, we've already altered our plans, getting ready, trying to keep everyone at the center as safe as we can. A lot of us right now, because it's not hurricane season, we've been working from home the last several weeks. So our goal this year is going to be to keep everyone as healthy and safe as we can. And we have those plans ready to make sure we're going to be ready for hurricane season.
So finally, what would be your message to Puerto Rico? How can we become more resilient in order to address the challenges that climate change is bringing for more intense hurricanes or additional catastrophic hurricanes?
I think the big message is always going to be preparedness, that we really have to make sure that we're ready each and every hurricane season. There may be things that you can do to your home to make it stronger. And some of these aren't that expensive, but I would encourage folks to really look around and see what you can do. Make sure you have your window coverings. It might be to fortify a garage door, because that's another area that can fail in hurricanes. Do some of those things to make your home stronger. And then it's really all about making sure that you have those supplies at hand so that you can get through the storm. It's in some ways it is a sort of personal responsibility, and we really all need to do it. I live in a hurricane-prone area. I mean, I live in South Florida. I live not too far from Miami, and yes, we get hurricanes. Thankfully, here we haven't had a direct hit, but we've had a lot of threats in the last few years, like Irma. But again, it makes me have to do those same precautions here to be ready so that I can continue to do my job at the Hurricane Center.
We thank you so much, Dan Brown, hurricane specialist of the National Hurricane Center, and also the warning and coordination meteorologist, for being with us in this week, the Hurricane Preparedness Week, with the EcoExploratorio Museo de Ciencias de Puerto Rico. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.